Good evening, everybody. Micheál Colleen here from NLP Northern Ireland. And this evening I want to share with you a model around understanding your life, understanding the different patterns and the different behaviors that we manifest throughout different parts of our life. So let me give you a little background on this. I was sitting down with my family the other day and I was talking about some of the really powerful models that you learn when you become an NLP practitioner, when you learn about neuro-linguistic programming, the model about how the mind works, the user manual for the mind. And as I was doing that, I was saying, like, who most would value understanding the tools and techniques of NLP? And in that conversation, I started to explain to my family, just sitting around the kitchen table, like the different types of people that would benefit from learning about NLP. And this became a conversation that mapped out a structure. And before I knew it, I'd mapped out almost a complete model of what I call the heartbeat of a story. So a heartbeat of a story is something that we teach in our advanced training, which is about breakthroughs and how people go through transformation. It's kind of part of the model of Transform People Academy. So it's not pure NLP per se, but it's an NLP model that I developed based on understanding personalities and understanding a Jungian psychology and psychological types, the hero's journey and different things like that. So I wanted to share some of this with you this evening. And what it comes down to is three different, slants on each stage of life. The first one is what's happening in life. When somebody says, how are you doing? How's life? Then you'll find people have kind of a catch-all statement for how they're doing in life today. And what I found is there's about 14 categories, right? And I'm going to run through, give you a short, brief example of each of these. And then I'm going to explain what that means in terms of this journey of the heartbeat. And then I'm going to explain to you what's really happening, what you're experiencing, or what you're saying to yourself at this part of the journey. And it's very revealing. So let's start. One of the things you'll say is when you ask somebody something, you'll say, how's life? And they'll say life is, and they'll answer with some sort of a short kind of summary of their life. And the first one I want to start with is life is boring. Have you ever met somebody who says, life's really boring at the moment? Now, the life is boring is actually the last stage of a previous cycle, and it's before the first stage of a new cycle of life. And what this indicates is that we're seeking change. We're looking for something new. We're looking for something to change in our life because what's been happening now is no longer fulfilling. It's no longer giving us the sort of joie de vivre that we're looking for. And this is a really great thing to spot, because if you start to recognize that life is boring, you can be guaranteed of one of two things are going to happen soon. Number one, you're going to start a new adventure because you sat down and right, I'm going to start an adventure. I'm going to do something new. I'm going to plan something new. I'm going to take up a new course, take up a new hobby. I'm going to travel. I'm going to change jobs. I'm going to change relationships. I'm going to change house, something like that. Or if you choose not to take action to do it yourself, what you might find is that the universe does it to you. In other words, the banality of life is taken away from you through some sort of self-sabotage pattern or some sort of accidental occurrence in life. These are well recognized patterns. Have you ever been in a situation where you've said life's really boring for a while and suddenly you started this incredible adventure? Sometimes because you want to start the adventure, but sometimes you don't, and the adventure happens to you. So this is the first stage. You're looking for something new. The last stage of the previous cycle. So this brings us to the start of a new cycle. And the way you can recognize the start of a new cycle, or just prior to the start of a new cycle, is you hear people saying something like, life is frustrating. So this is the point where life is at the point where you know something has to change, but it hasn't changed yet. And it's building up frustration for you about your experience. This is the start of a cycle. It's the start of an adventure that maybe you're not seeing yet. Maybe you're not seeing the start of this adventure. Maybe it's unconscious, or it's something that's building and the frustration is building and it's going to tip you over the edge of starting this adventure. And then what happens? Then what happens is something significant happens in your life. It could be an accident, it could be a trauma, it could be a mistake, it could be a success. Something happened and changes everything. And this is where the person says, if you ask them how's life, they say life is chaos. Right. And life is chaos really is an indication that the model of the world, how you see the world today, is broken. You have a way of predicting how life should be. You have expectations, you have beliefs about how the world is. And the world now has changed and those beliefs are no longer true. A lot of people experienced this at the start of the pandemic. Life was chaos because they had expectations of how life should be. I've made these plans. I have these expectations. I have these things that I want to do, but it's not working out. And I have to change. And that can be a traumatic experience for someone. It's a significant emotional experience, an SEE. We'll come back to this later on. And a significant emotional experience can be trauma, it can be hurtful, it can be painful, it can be exhilarating, it can be exciting. It depends on how the person deals with that significant emotional experience. But one thing for sure is you've just started on an adventure. Now, it could be a very short-lived adventure. More than likely, it's not. Now, quite often what happens when people start on this venture and things become chaotic, then we hang on to the past. We try to get back to the way things were before. So ask yourself this. When the pandemic went on longer than a couple of months, did you find yourself wishing that you could go back to the way things were, the predictability of the way things were? But it's impossible because the world has changed. So then if you ask people how life is, sometimes you hear people say life is hell. Life has just got worse. There's chaos, but it's worse than chaos because now you can't see what's happening at all. There's no predictability about what's happening. And what's happening here really is that your model of the world, how you see the world, has literally collapsed. But the new model for how the world should be actually hasn't taken shape yet. You haven't found solid footing to put your foot on. So there's no way of actually stepping into that solid ground. There's no foundation stone there. And what you experience is a loss of identity. So when people saying life is hell, what they're saying is, I don't know what's happening. I don't even know who I am anymore. And the reason for that is because their identity is changing. Their reality is changing. They're going through a point that is irrevocable. They're going through a point that is going to change everything forever, but they haven't reached that point yet. Now they get to one of the lowest points in the journey, the most challenging points in the journey. And the question then is, how is it going? And you ask them, how's it going? And they'll say, life is desperate. Or they'll say, I'm in the valley of despair. Or I'm living out the dark nights of the soul. Or they'll just say something that describes that they've just hit a wall, that they're at the worst place they could be. And this can be a very dangerous time for some people, especially if people are not with good companionship or good friends or with family. And this marks out the end of the breaking down of the old model of the world and the start of the creation of the new model world. A new identity is about to be formed, and they're starting to get new footing. But it doesn't seem like this at the moment. What it seems like at the moment is that everything is just collapsing around you, and it just seems desperate times, desperate measures. It just looks like there's no end in sight. The tunnel goes on, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel. This comes to a bifurcation point. So if you look into the physics of chaos theory, you'll find these bifurcation points where things split in two roads. There's the high road and the low road. And this is the point where the power of the mindset and the power of NLP and the power of understanding your journey, understanding your life, understanding where you're at and how to reframe your experiences, how to seek out the positive and the negative, how to look for the good and the bad really comes to fruition. When you get to this point where you're living the dark nights of the soul and you trust and you start to go with it, then what happens is you start to get solid footing. So this is the bifurcation point where you're tottering on the brink of disaster, literally, and you really don't know if you're going to make it to the other side. Because what we're doing here is we're forming a new identity. It's almost like we have to become the renegade. We have to break the mold of how we're experiencing life to get to the other side. We have to make that leap of faith, which brings us to the next point, which is when you ask someone, how's it going? They'll say, I'm finding life confusing. And this confusion marks the end of the old world and the start of the new world. It's the point where the creator energy from Carl Jung archetypes becomes the strongest, and the destroyer energy can also become very strong. What we're experiencing here is a total surrender into the unknown, and it requires a leap of faith. It requires trusting the process, trusting the experience, and just going with the flow. And what you'll hear people saying is when they're in this place where they're saying they're confused, is that I can't decide. Ever meet somebody who says, I just can't make my mind up. I can't decide what I'm doing. Well, this may be because the world as they know it today has collapsed. How they see the world, the solidity and the foundation and the path they've been following for so long no longer works, and they haven't got a clear footing yet of the next stage. And what happens is nothing's working. And they are literally at the point of changing their life, but they can't see it yet. So it can be very confusing. Now, at this stage, a new identity has been formed. They're becoming a new person. They're following a new path. They're carving out a new space, but they can't see the path yet. So at this stage, there may be a desire or need or want to go back to the old way of world, of saying, oh, I wish things could be simpler. I wish things could be somehow different. And what we're looking for here is we're looking at denial. So this is where people get the most frustrated, they get the most angst, and they get to the point where they want to go back to a different way. What you'll also see here is people are starting to say life is hard or life is tough because they're fighting against the natural flow of life. It's almost like they're trying to paddle upstream, but the torrent is actually getting stronger and it's actually moving them downstream. So they're not getting to where they want to be. So this is the point of denial. And I suppose the lesson here, or the step here, is to truly surrender and to go against it. So you're not trying to go against life, you're trying to go with life. Which brings us to the next stage, which is, if you ask someone how are they doing, they say life is rewarding. You're starting to get success. You're starting to get some recognition. You're starting to grow. You're not there yet, but you've got some, the grass is starting to grow. The seeds are starting to bud. Things are starting to prove, and you're getting recognition. And what they're saying at this stage is, I am impatient. So they can see things are working, but they're working very slowly. And you want to get there faster. You want to get there quicker. You want to just be done and get there. But of course, this is all part of the journey. The next part is probably the most enjoyable part, because this is the place where we ask somebody, how's life? They'll say, life is fulfilling. Life is great. I'm loving it. I'm getting rewards. I'm getting recognition. I'm putting in the hard work, but I can see the results happening. Everything is starting to grow and I'm happy. So this is the growth stage where you're starting to expand as an individual. You're starting to get success, and you're getting recognition as well, which brings us to probably the second success stage, which is life is transformational. This is where you see people and they're saying they're having a massive breakthrough, or the days are flying, everything's going so well. I just wish I had more time. I wish I had more time to experience everything I'm experiencing, because it's like, it's great at the moment. I'm loving it. And it's just, I just wish I had more time, more hours in the day. I wish I could get more help. I wish I could, because now I know it's working. I'm getting the feedback. I'm getting recognition. Life is good, but there's just not enough hours in the day. And this is the real transformational stage until we get to the next stage, which we actually hit a state of flow. And this is where you say, life is awesome. Now I'm really enjoying the journey. And in this state, you've just experienced a massive breakthrough. It's probably the point you start to actually believe what you're doing is working. Up to this stage, you have doubts. Up to this stage, you're saying, well, maybe something could go wrong. Maybe we could go back to where it was, and the the ground could be pulled from under you again. So this stage now, you're really experiencing flow. You're at one with the universe. You're at one with your journey. You're at one with the people in your group, and you experience true state of flow. Optimal experience is what Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi called in the book Flow. So in that state of flow, your life is awesome. You're having a wonderful experience. You're connecting with people intuitively. You're waking up in the morning, and things you think about just happened almost by just the thought of you thinking about it. Your intention matches your actions, and the word becomes manifest right in front of your eyes. And this is probably the most powerful experience people will have when they go through transformational change. And this can last for days, weeks, months, or even years, until things settle down and now life starts to become predictable. And you ask, how's life going? It's like, it's getting predictable. I can pretty much say what's going to happen. I could keep going for the next 5 or 10 years, and I could say this could go exactly the same way. And I'm very grateful. I love life. Everything is amazing. I should be grateful, but it's almost like I'm a little bit scared that something is going to change, which comes us back to the 15th stage, which is life is boring. And now you're back at the cycle again, and you're seeking change. It's the end of a cycle, and you're about to start a new adventure. So what does this mean for people who are on a journey of change? Now, what it means is that as you go through this journey of change, you're probably going to relate to one or more of these particular phrases. Maybe for you, it's life is boring, and I'm looking for something new. So when you're looking for something new, you've got two choices here. You either go and create something new, you start the adventure consciously, because if you don't, the adventure might be given to you. And it's always better to create the experience of that change, to jump first with cognition, with recognition of what you're going into, rather than something being taken away from you and actually tripping over and falling into an adventure. So what's really important here is goal setting. It's about understanding the NLP model around goal setting, about SMART goals, but specifically about the difference between associated images of the future and disassociated images of the future. Because the distinction between those two changes how you actually see the future. Maybe for somebody it's frustrating. Now, frustrating is an interesting one because this marks the start of a cycle. So with frustration, if frustration builds and actually doesn't get released, then frustration can turn to anger, and that can be projected to other people, and this can cause things to backfire. And that can quite often be one of the reasons why people actually have significant emotional experiences. They get frustrated with people, they get frustrated with their job, they get frustrated with their environment, they get frustrated with what's happening around them, and then they actually break the first rule in the pillars of transformation, which is the cause and effect violation, where they start to blame other things or other people for their frustrations, rather than recognizing that the frustration comes from within and they're about to start a journey. So when they connect with that experience inside and they say, oh, I'm frustrated because of how I see the world, as opposed to I'm frustrated at the world, then you take back control of your decisions and you can start to be cognizant, you can be conscious of the decisions you're making. You make conscious decisions rather than making unconscious decisions. So how does NLP affect the next one? The next one is like, I'm in chaos. This is where the model of the world is broken. The person has experienced a significant emotional experience. Now, for some people, it might be a trauma, but for other people, it might be just a shock, right? And again, how we deal with shocks, how we deal with traumas, how we deal with that comes down to our mindset and our thinking. So what's really important here is be able to see not just what's happening, but recognizing where people are projecting around what's happening. We saw a lot of this at the start of the pandemic. When the world is changing, a lot of people are saying, well, what do we do now? Do we lean on the government? Do we lean on our family? Do we lean on our friends? Who do we lean into to figure out how to navigate this new territory? And of course, the problem was nobody had answers. But this brings out a very important aspect of leadership and a very important aspect of what we needed to see at the start of the pandemic. And in the beginning, we didn't see it, which is when there's chaos all around, people will listen to the person who has the most certainty. Think about that for a moment. When there's chaos all around, people will listen to the person who is the most certainty. Now think about that. It's not the person who's most correct or most right or has the best answers, because nobody knows what's happening in a point of chaos. They listen to the person with the most certainty. So even if nobody knows what's happening, if nobody can predict what's happening in the future, the person who actually speaks with the most authority, with the most confidence, with the most clarity, that they've got a plan and they're willing to follow through on that plan, people lean into that and they say, okay, looks like that person knows what needs to be done. Let's go and do what that person says. So this is really important in moments of chaos. And of course, the reason this happens is because when people go through chaos, the reason that happens is the model of the world collapses. Model of world being is how they see the world. The rules of the world have collapsed. How they expect things to be have collapsed. And now they're saying, well, what can I do now instead? And when your model of the world is broken, you have to find a new model of the world, a new way of operating the world, as we all found over the last couple of years. And the challenge is, if you don't find a new model of the world, a new way of operating in a new world, then what happens is we lean back on the old world. And of course, the old world doesn't exist anymore. We can't go back there. But people try to force things to happen. They try to force manifestation. And of course, that always backfires. And of course, what that happens is they go down to the next stage, which is I'm living in hell, or life is hell. And of course, that's basically when we start to lose faith. We start to lose identity. How we see ourselves is not what we experience. And now we're starting to deal with core beliefs. And again, NLP comes in very powerfully here, because when you study NLP deeply, you start to look at how our core beliefs impact our decisions, and how our decisions impact our emotional state, and how they impact our action, which affects our results that we get. So if we're in the state of feeling that we're in a state of hell and the model of the world has collapsed, we can't find followed footing, then we start to lose identity. We start to lose faith in ourselves. We start to lose confidence in ourselves, and we start to lose direction, because we don't have a direction anymore. Things have changed. Which brings us to the next one, the valley of despair. So this is I'm desperate, I'm in a desperate place. The valley of despair, the dark nights of the soul. And this is the bottom of the slump, I guess, before we actually start to find a new identity. That new identity comes at the bifurcation point. This is from chaos theory. And this is when we start to form a new identity. Now, there's two ways this can go. The path that I'm sharing with you today is when we figure out that new identity and we actually start to change. We go through transformation, we get different results, and we start to grow. But there's another path, which I haven't talked about, which is we actually pick the old path at the bifurcation point. And that's the path of failure. That's where we just give up. And this is where people can have meltdowns, or can have breakdowns, if they can have burnout, or they can get exhausted, or they just collapse and they just can't function anymore. And we're seeing a lot of this as well. Some of it comes across as things like long COVID. Some of it comes across as people getting a lot of illnesses after a particularly long period of chaos and hell and desperation, all the rest of it. They just can't cope anymore. This is where a lot of mental problems come out as well, where people are struggling to maintain their psychological clarity, and their mental clarity becomes compromised as well. But if we can get through this point and start to form an identity, then we have one more battle to fight, which is the battle of confusion, because now we have created a new version of ourselves. We've just come into that person. We're just forming that new identity, but we haven't figured out who that person is yet. So it's trusting yourself becomes the challenge now. And it becomes confusing, because you know the way the world used to be. You can remember what people said. You can remember what you used to do. But the new world isn't solid enough yet to be able to map out how the future is going to be. So you don't know, will this work? You don't know, is this the right choice? And you doubt yourself. And this is where you say, I can't decide. I can't make a decision. I feel uncertain about what's going to happen. And this is really the point where we really have to start trusting ourselves and trusting our focus. The next stage is, of course, building on that. This is the stage of denial. I don't know. Again, we have to surrender here. So this is about life is against me. At this point, then we go through the next 3 stages are very important. It's where we get some success, we get some recognition, and then we get more success, more recognition, and then we eventually get to the breakthrough. So from the point we start to see success to the point we get to the breakthrough, this is the fastest amount of growth. And when we get to that breakthrough point, that's when we really experience flow. And the only way that can happen is by letting go of the past. And there's many ways we can do that. The techniques that we share in our trainings are something called Time Heals Paradigm, which is literally clearing up the limitations of the past, the old beliefs of the past, the negativity of the past. We clear out all of those issues, all of these problems, all of those limiting beliefs, those inconveniencing beliefs that stop you from moving forward. When we get those out of the way, those obstacles get cleared, then we get clarity, get focus, we get direction, and we start to see things more clearly. And then we start to get those big breakthroughs. We start to get into flow and experience real flow. And then the world is our oyster. Everything starts to change. We believe in ourselves. People around us believe in us. Everybody supports us on that journey, and it becomes a transformational point. And this is where you say, I'm awesome. Life is awesome. Everything is great. You go through the breakthrough, and that's where you want to be. So that's a very short introduction into the heartbeat of a story model. And I hope you found it useful. If you did, let me know in the comments below. I'll speak to you all in the next video. Take care and speak to you all soon.